Um, so part of the benefit of being an interdisciplinary researcher is that I get to interrupt conferences like this with 20-minute poetry readings. So my practice focuses mainly on computer-generated poetry, and I think a lot about, in specific, the ways that, well, maybe a better place to start. I was looking up the etymology of the word to write means to make a scratch, means to make a record, right? So when you're writing something, like it literally is like you're leaving a record behind in the form of like a scratch on something. And then the word read in English we take to mean like an interpretation of some kind of record. That's the way that it's used in English. In every other language that has a reflex of that verb, the word read means to control or govern. And in Latin, the verb for read, the lect root or whatever, that becomes leer and leer in Spanish, leer in French and leer in Spanish, is also the same word that's in elect, right? So sort of based in this idea of reading is choosing, it's picking. There's no one interpretation of a text. We're always like trying to exert control over it, making choices about what we're going to get out of it. So what I see the work of poetry as being is, how do you fashion records that invite interesting choices, right? How do you make a scratch that's going to be difficult or weird or interesting to read? And I think computers are good at that. It's using a computer to create those interesting scratches, I think, is a very fruitful vein of research, and many poets have been using procedural methods for decades and for centuries, actually, if you look at it in a particular way, to make text that's unexpected. So I'm going to show you some of my practice and read some of the poems that I've made with these techniques. Thank you to those of you who have heard me read poems made with these techniques before. There's some new stuff in here, so hopefully you won't get too bored. But it's super exciting work, so I don't know why you would get bored. So I've been working recently on a way to create a continuous vector space for the phonetics of words. So by that I mean the way words sound, right? So the idea is that you can take an English word, a phonetic transcription of that word. This is a phonetic transcription in a system called ARPABET, which was invented by the US military to encode the sounds of English words so they could develop speech-to-text technology in like the 1960s, but now linguists use it for some reason. So the idea is that you can take that transcription and then, using a process of machine learning and dimensional reduction, end up with a number that indicates the phonetics of that word. So this is the number that contains the information of how the word abacus sounds. Now the reason for doing this is that once you have those vectors, you can draw graphs like this. This isn't actually real data here, but the idea is that the numbers that represent a word like octopus will be similar to the numbers that represent a word like apocalypse, because those two words sound similar: octopus, apocalypse. Your mouth moves in the same ways, basically, when you are saying those words. Versus inky doesn't sound at all like octopus. Kinky sounds like inky, but neither of those words sound like octopus and apocalypse. So that process of converting the phonetics of these words into numbers allows you to be systematic about this particular relationship. But once you have these vectors, all kinds of interesting properties fall out, and that's sort of where my poetic practice has been focused for the past year or so. So once you have a vector to represent a word, you can do all of the regular vector arithmetic that you would do on signals that are represented as vectors. So like audio samples are vectors of amplitude samples. Images are vectors of samples from a camera and red, green, blue color space. Now we have samples of words in this phonetic vector space. So for example, the same way that you can blend two images together by finding the average between the values of the pixels, you can blend two words together by finding the word closest to the average of the vectors for those words. So just to demonstrate that, here are some pairs of words, and I found the average, the word that's closest to the average of those two. So the average of the word paper and plastic is peptic, and the average of the word kitten and puppy is committee. The average of the words birthday and anniversary is perversity. And the average of the words artificial and intelligence is ostentatious, weirdly. So I've been doing a lot of experiments with these vectors and the idea of like blending smoothly between two words. This is the alphabet with inserting in between the letters the words that are closest like to the in between of those, like smoothly interpolating from one letter to the next. So I'm gonna recite this really quick. A, A, B, B, D, B, C, 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 D, 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 T, D, 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 Addy, E, A, A, F, Sved, Hefe, Effigy, Veci, G, Edgy, Getty, Giuseppe, Edith, H, Ik, Eighth, A, U, Ade, J, Che, K, Katie, Kale, L, M, Tel, M, Airman, N, A, O, A, U, P, that was wrong, P, Kiowa, Kiowani, Q, Ru, R, S, Essie, Tessie, Techie, T, Yao, Hu, U, Hu, Yoi, Venue, V, Doobie, W, Acceptable, Detectable, Extendable, Adaptex, X, Equitex, X-Wife, Y, yeah, they, Z. Now you know your interpolated ABCs. Next time, won't you sing with me? That's just the first thing that I'm going to read. So given that you can find the halfway point between two words, smoothly interpolate between them, I've been doing a bunch of poems that basically smoothly interpolate between one sentence and then just the same word repeated over and over and over again. So this is the phrase, the piece that I'm going to read next is called Songwriters Sometimes Disregard Noisy Rules. And this phrase up here, it is an old observation that the best writers sometimes disregard the rules of rhetoric, is a phrase from Strunk's Element of Style. Not Strunk and White's Elements of Style, because that's under copyright, but the original one is not, so I'm using this one instead. So I'm going to transform this, interpolate between this first sentence and just the word noise over and over and over again. This is the first time that I've read this one, so it could get messy. It is an old observation that the best writers sometimes disregard the rules of rhetoric. It is anon old observation that the best writers sometimes disregard the rules of rhetoric. Ick is anon old observation that the best writers sometimes disregard the rules Ava's rhetoric. Ick is anon old reservationist that the best writers sometimes disregard the rules Ava's rhetoric. Ick as anon, old reservationist that noisy-based songwriters sometimes disregard noisy rules Ava's rhetoric. Ick as anon, aldridge reservationist digit noisy zalt songwriters teams resorted noisy rules Ava's rhetoric. Audi's noises annoys aldridge reservationist digit noisy zites songwriters times resorted noisy Roselon's Ava's parenthetical. Audi's noises annoys Aldridge, reservationist, jointed, noisy, Zeitz, songwriters, Times's, George's, noisy, Roselon's, Eva's, parenthetical. Audi's noises annoys Aldridge, reservationist, jointed, noisy, disjoint, noise, Times's, George's, noisy, Roselon's, adjoin, Resendez. Annoys, noises, annoys, noise, annoys, jointed, noisy, disjoint, noise, joins, noises, noisy, noise, adjoin, noise. Annoys, noises, annoys, noise, noise, jointed, noisy, noise, 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 noisy, noisy, adjoin, noise. Oh, I'm practicing the word noise so much, it's getting... Annoys, noises, annoys, noise, 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 noisy, noise, 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 noisy, noise, adjoins, noise. Noise, 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 noise. The fun thing about that one is that when you're smiling, that's the same position as ois. So I can laugh while I'm doing that one and it doesn't affect it. So building on that idea, another thing that you can do is you can take the vectors for one word and then just add a constant to each word. And this is sort of like the first step of that previous piece. And you can create a new text by adding that constant. So based on this idea, there are these two, in studies of synesthesia, there's these two shapes, kiki and buba, and it turns out that these are like universals of sound symbolism. So if you ask people from many different cultures, many different backgrounds, many different ages, if you ask which one of these shapes is kiki and which one is buba, people will always say that the spiky one is kiki and the round one is buba. That's like a linguistic universal, or a synesthetic universal. So it's a kind of sound symbolism, right? So what I want to do here is rewrite Robert Frost's The Road Not Taken by adding the vector constant for kiki to it and the vector constant for buba to it. And this is the original, to see if we can like make a spiky version of this poem and like a round version of this poem. You can see how that works. How are we doing on time? 5 minutes. Oh my God. So I'm gonna assume that you have some familiarity with this first version of the piece. Well, actually, I'll just end with this one, and then I'll leave the last thing for you to buy at the store at some point. So here's Robert Frost, The Road Not Taken, without any extra sound symbolism applied to it mathematically. Two roads diverged in a yellow wood, and sorry I could not travel both and be one traveler. Long I stood and looked down one as far as I could to where it bent in the undergrowth. Then took the other as just as fair, and having perhaps the better claim because it was grassy and wanted wear. Though as for that, the passing there had warned them really about the same, and both that morning equally lay in leaves no step had trodden black. Oh, I kept the first for another day, yet knowing how way leads on to way, I doubted if I should ever come back. I shall be telling this with a sigh, somewhere ages and ages hence. Two roads diverged in a wood, and I took the one less traveled by, and that has made all the difference. So here's that same poem, with the vector of kiki added to each word. Kuki roads diverged in a yellow wood key, and Sarti I goki pecan kival booth, and P1 traveler long I stuki, and loci down one as far as I goki tucky, waikiki eek beak in the undergrowth. Then Kupek the other as cheeky as Fichera, and having perhaps the Becky came, Peaky eek was kisi and waikiki wacky, though as for peak, the peaking peaky, Haki warned them kiki kabuki the safekeeping. And Booth Peak morning, Kiki lay, and Teeves no techie, hacky tea garden, blacky oh I khaki, thee thirsty for another gee. Vakiti kion hawe teagues on tucky wee. I tiki if I should kiver come baki. I kishi pi lucky, Keith with ye psyche, squeaky kazai and kazai hence. Kooky roads diverged in a wood key, and I coopek the one lucky keevil be, and peak has peeg all the difference. There's that one. This is the same poem plus Buba. Chubu roads, Barbersville in a yellow wood, and Bari I Koba knob traveled both, and Bobby one Bosler down my stoba, and jukebox bowed one as fod as I Koba, to bowel it bont in the bogard. Babu Bo cooked the bother as Babu as fair, and having perhaps the Bobette claim, Bogas it Zabawa, Baresi, and Wamba Bowel, though as for Bogach the Babu Hob warned them bodly abood the same. And both Bogach booming equally lay, and Bob's no Bobette Hob Bob. Oh, I Bobcat the first for Botherdoy. Bobette knowing Baha way Bob's on to way, I bowed if I should ever kebab Bob. I shall Bobby Babu Bogas with a Cebu, Babu Bobbies and Bobbies hence, Chubu roads, Barbersville, in a wood, and I Bo Cook, the one Babu traveled ba, and Bogach has by Labo all the balance. The next piece is too long, and I'm already at my time limit, so I think that's all I'm going to read. Thank you very much.
Hi, this is just really quick. Why are some words more resilient to the kiki or the booba than others?
That's a good question. I guess I can't just say it's the AI's fault, because I just said that you aren't supposed to do that. I think it's just the way that the vectors are constructed. Some of those phonemes are just more frequent than the others. So I think some of the dimensions in the dimensional reduction just didn't pick up on those things. So when you're adding on the new vector, it's not enough to like jog it from one word to another.
Because it's so weighty on the other side. Kind of.
Yeah, or because like the space that's made by the vectors isn't very well distributed. It's like very clumpy. So you may end up with a word that's just like sitting off in the vector space, and it doesn't matter how much you add to it. It just takes too much for the word that's closest to it to be some word other than that.
Yeah, because it's insular, basically.
What's that?
Because it's insular.
I guess that would be a good term for it.
Yeah, thanks.
Other question?
I wanted to know how you think about the role of the computation. Is it a tool that you control, or do you see it as a collaborator, and just what that relationship is like?
Right. Yeah, I mean, I have strong opinions about this. It's definitely a tool. I don't like the idea of conceptualizing computer programs as collaborators, because to me that's a way, on the one hand, it's a way of like distributing responsibility to say like, oh, well, that's a thing that the program made, I didn't make it. As a way, first of all, of like not accepting responsibility for the output of that thing. But the other part of it is that like, poets have been using procedure for a really long time, and nobody's saying like, oh, well, that's poets and other artists. Like nobody's saying like, that's painting by Jackson Pollock is actually by Jackson Pollock and paint can, right? And I sort of view these tools in the same way. Like these are poems that I wrote using a tool that I made. It's not typical poetic practice, but it's still mine. Good? Okay.